And I think we're just gonna wait like another minute or so to make sure everyone from the waiting room gets in.
Lori, is there anything we need to do different from the first time?
I don't know, unless there's something you felt like you didn't get to say last time that would have been helpful.
I don't think so.
All right, so we can get started. We'll welcome to the last session for today. So thank you all for joining us. This is on planning for the unexpected with Lori Crowder, who's also executive director, and then Mississippi's stop administrator team, Joy Jones and Brad Martin. And so today they're going to talk about contingency planning, planning for the unexpected. We do have closed captioning available for this session. So if you would like to access that function, you can select the closed captioning icon in the bottom of the screen, and then you want to select show subtitles. These meetings will be recorded, so you will be able to access them sometime shortly after this meeting. And then you will have access to your microphone and to your camera. You can utilize it. I know that our session presenters would appreciate if you used it. So yeah, I will now go ahead and pass things over to them, and thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. Let's just do a brief round of introductions. I'm Lori Crowder. I had the pleasure of meeting you all earlier today. I'm the executive director of Also, which is a technical assistance provider for stop administrators, and we're also a direct service agency in Chicago. And I'll pass it to Joy and Brad to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Joy Jones. I am the Deputy Director with the Office Against Interpersonal Violence at the Mississippi State Department of Health and the former stop administrator. And I have approximately 15 years of direct services with the domestic violence shelter and then 3 years with the Mississippi Attorney General's office.
Good afternoon. It's glad to join y'all this afternoon. I'm Brad Martin, work with the State Department of Health in Mississippi. I've been in this role just over 6 months, serving as a stop administrator and also the SASP administrator. I have about 17 years of government experience in Mississippi, from a variety of topic areas, from youth tobacco to worksite wellness, cancer control, and now interpersonal violence. So, look forward to conversing with y'all today.
Thanks, Brad and Joy. So what we're hoping today is to structure our time together at the very end of the day as a dialogue, not as a presentation, but as a conversation, and to be in conversation with each other and to be in conversation with you about how to plan for unexpected events in your state or territory, and to help subgrantees do the same, to be able to be as planful and intentional as possible. The thinking behind this session, obviously we've all experienced together, a pandemic, which required us to develop some, develop some change management strategies for ourselves and subgrantees. But we've also developed, probably strategies associated with a variety of disasters or, weather-related issues in our states and territories, that whether that's hurricanes or tornadoes or power outages. I heard some of you mention some of those factors in the introductions this morning. But we want to be someone had talked earlier about sort of the gifts of the pandemic, right? The gifts and the opportunities for reflection, the gifts and the opportunities to sort of learn from these situations so that we can be more planful and intentional moving forward. The framework, for this planning that also has undergone is sort of thinking about scenario-based planning and contingency planning. So contingency planning is kind of like one type of scenario planning. Also received some technical assistance from the MacArthur Foundation so that we could really think about how to protect our key programs and staff and maintain core operations during a crisis minimizing or mitigating loss and damage. And frankly, it's where you envision multiple types of scenarios and play them all the way through. You might come up with 3 or 4 future scenarios, good and bad. You imagine the positive and negative outcomes, and then imagine the kinds of decisions that you would make associated with those outcomes, and analyze the impact that that would have on your agency and programs and staff and communities, whether that's in the immediate future or years from now. It's sort of a complicated analytic process that we went through it also, that helped us think about both financial planning as well as programmatic planning. In addition to all those scenarios, right, we also did some thinking and contingency planning associated with best case, worst case, and most typical case, right? What's the worst case scenario, best case scenario? What do we think is probably going to happen within each of those scenarios? And then that guided our financial planning, our operations planning, and helped us make some decisions that helped keep us afloat and probably better prepared now than we've ever been before in case of a future disaster. As I said before, also does frontline work. And unfortunately, during the pandemic, and I'll talk about this later on, but during the pandemic, our frontline workers assumed additional risk and hazard. We lost a frontline worker to COVID. We lost a frontline worker to random fire gun violence during those kind of what I call dog days of the pandemic. Those are very stressful times. And I think, have learned from those very, very terrible experiences to put together some policies, practices, and protocols, and frankly, just relational ways of communicating with one another that I think are grounded and rooted in some shared values that have helped us sort of maintain our operations. Not only maintain them, but probably elevate our operations more than they've ever been elevated before. So with that, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Joy and Brad to talk to us a bit about Mississippi's experience with both the pandemic and the tornadoes, hurricanes, and the like that they've experienced. They've have a lot of firsthand experience managing disasters. And I'm wondering if you all can just talk to us a little bit about your own experiences and some of the lessons learned.
Thank you, Lori. I always tell everybody when it's Brad and I involved, I'm always going to be the first one to talk because I talk a lot. So thank you for joining us. I find the topic very interesting, and a lot of it is interesting because Brad and I were having some conversations with Courtney and Mary with also. And during the 4-week span that we were having meetings with them, Mississippi experienced hurricanes every week for 4 weeks. And actually it turned into almost 6 weeks, but during the time we were meeting with them 4 weeks. So we would have to have our little contingency plan for our scheduled Zoom meetings and say, okay, guys, we're here, but we don't know how long it's going to last because we're under a tornado warning and we don't know when we'll lose power and things like that. So it was some interesting dialogue during that time. And but Mississippi we all experience different disasters. We've all had the pandemic. The state of Mississippi seems to just kind of fall into a lot of categories there. Our state does fall into the tornado alley. So this year so far, we have recorded 87 tornadoes already this year. So, and like somebody mentioned in the session before, we will start preparing in about 2 months for hurricane season. We have hurricanes that come into our coast. We're right beside, since we're beside Louisiana, and between the two of us and then Florida, one of those 3 states, we're, typically at least one a year. So we have to prepare for that. last year, I think Brad and I decided it was in February, we had the winter storm. So we don't usually have winter storms here. So that wasn't new for the state of Mississippi, but we had to prepare for that, and then had to figure out how to be prepared for the next time. So we do try our best to adjust and be prepared for whatever we can be prepared for. And in those, we've worked with some of our agencies in doing different things and coming up with new and innovative ideas. And we talk about that all the time. I can tell you that a couple of things that we have done is we do have a domestic violence shelter that is funded through our office. And our office does have funding for VAWA, VOCA, SAS, a CDC grant, RPE. We've got several grants administered through our office. And so one of the things that we were able to work with the domestic violence shelter, domestic violence sexual assault shelter, is that through different types of funding sources, they purchase generators for their shelter. So that in the event of losing power or something like that, they would have those generators and be prepared. Another thing that we have worked on with different agencies within, especially the shelters, is that so when the hurricanes come in, there are different levels, which means they're going to come up to different levels of the state. Most of the time, we only have to worry about the central region down, which would be the Jackson area down. However, we have to be prepared for anything. I worked in a domestic violence shelter for 15 years. We were part of the evacuation plan for the coast or the domestic violence shelter on the coast. And so each shelter within the state doesn't necessarily have to be prepared for a hurricane to hit their area. However, they may have to be prepared to assist other shelters in the state if they have to evacuate. So that is a statewide plan that has that the Domestic Violence Coalition worked with us on, and that we have had to develop to ensure that if there is that situation, that those victims can get to a safe place that they need to be. Brad, I'm going to let Brad talk about the pandemic part, because he was frontline during that time for our agency. So I'm going to let him discuss that.
Yeah, well, thank you, Joy. And as she expressed, yeah, Mississippi, the joke is kind of, you don't like the weather, just wait a few minutes, it'll change. So, and we are located in central Mississippi. We fund various entities throughout the state, municipalities, shelters. But I did learn a lot. I worked COVID response for a long time, as I'm sure a lot of y'all on this Zoom meeting did. So I did learn a lot from it. We want y'all to, today's session, it really kind of, I'm sure y'all have, reflected on some times during the pandemic, lessons learned, and it has been expressed, there are some good things that we have learned about ourselves, our entities, organizations from the pandemic. So, it's kind of lessons learned. But yeah, I did work response for a while. I would be involved with, so I was basically a shift supervisor for the hotline or the call center. Also worked at the Capitol when the legislators were there for a special session. Did some different things there. So, but I did learn a lot. I had to do sometimes multiple report outs daily at the command center, our Mississippi Emergency Management Agency. So I learned a lot about emergency response. My background was not in that, so it was kind of, but a lot of acronyms were used at that time, and but just learning about, because COVID was deemed in Mississippi, as I'm sure with y'all states, a public health emergency. So it was categorized as emergency support function, or ESF, that's often used, ESF 8. And so, our recommendation, kind of brainstorming for the Zoom, is just to, reach out, learn more about your state, the way Mississippi is structured. We learned a lot. I'm very fortunate to have Mr. Jim Craig, so we're with the State Department of Health, and we're a large agency. And so Mr. Jim's a senior deputy and director of the Office of Health Protection. So he was instrumental in response during Hurricane Katrina back in 2005, and then also with COVID-19. So we learned a lot from him and had some really good dialogue about, from a sub-grantee level, and also for your head knowledge, but, learning more about how your state is structured. We have county EMA, or emergency management agency directors that work in every county. So recommend that your local shelters, they probably may know them already, but, learning your state structure for local response, but having that dialogue, learning the state level relationships are key, communication are key, of what we all know that communication is key. But learning about how your state is structured. So we have county EMAs. We recommend the shelters and subgrantees work with their county EMA folks. You've heard the term plan your work your plan. We were having dialogue with Mr. Jim about, he gave us an example of a town in the Delta, because Mississippi has basically about 5 unique geographical areas. And we were just having dialogue, and he was talking about, organizations that had a plan. Come to find out, the plan was to use the same church's shuttle bus in their response. Well, there was one church shuttle bus and 2 organizations wanting to use it. And so that was just a real life example of, you may have the best plan in your mind or on paper, but if you don't kind of practice it or enact it per se, it's a plan. It's not obviously going to be accomplish what you want it to accomplish. So it's really, communication, dialogue, but learning with the support functions that we learned. So there are coordinated plans that emergency preparedness, generally do. And so we have the Mississippi Emergency Management Agency website that houses, the different county EMAs, the different plans. The health department is instrumental in that. So we really are fortunate to have that within our agency. And so we just, recommend with y'all, learning more about what's at the local level that your sub-grantees have access to. Do they have a plan? How often do they practice their plan? Maybe you could, coordinate that and have more dialogue on that. We also shared previously how that do you incorporate that into the RFP piece with having different emergency plans in place. But so those are just some of the things that we, talk about in the beginning, but just learning about how your state's response, because we, weather, the pandemic, things of that nature, but how do you make that a priority with your sub-grantees? Or if they have that as a priority already, are you aware of that and can learn from each other on that?
I'm wondering how, Joy and Brad, being located in the Department of Human Services, affected sort of how you all operated or were able to leverage resources and support. How is that sort of unique situation for your as top administrators? How did that affect kind of your thinking about emergency preparedness?
I think for us, as stop administrators, we were fortunate because being part of the health department meant that we were frontline knowing what was going on, since it was a health crisis. And so we knew a lot of what was going on before a lot of other people in the state. So I think that was a big benefit for us. Knowing that we were able to work with some of our sub-grantees differently than we normally would have. We weren't hearing things on the back end. We knew things up front. And we're willing to assist. One of the things that I think one of the most positive outcomes of what we were able to assist with is that the dissemination of the vaccinations. We were able to work on behalf of the emergency shelters that we fund to work with, like Brad said, Jim Craig, and to move these agencies up on the priority list so that they receive their vaccinations sooner than they would have if they just went by the age, like our state started with certain ages, and then health issues and things like that. So these specific groups, the domestic violence shelters and the emergency shelters, were moved up into that first category so that they could receive their vaccinations earlier to ensure more safety for the health and wellness of the victims coming in and out of the shelter and the staff that would be working with them every day. And I think that was a good thing. I think it not only helped the victims out, but it relieved a large burden off of the staff that were working with these victims. And because if they didn't have the vaccinations, then they could at least offer an option to get them to a place where they could receive those vaccinations sooner than they thought they would have been. So that, and then just being able to be updated, like I said, up front instead of on the back end, I think was a very positive thing. Being able to, we knew, of course, I'm sure every state dealt with it, but we knew a little bit ahead of time when the governor was going to go ahead and sign the stay home mandate. That, you know, we knew it was happening. So we could work with the law enforcement officers that are funded through the grants and work with them and say, you know, we know that some of you are 100% funded. However, we understand what's going on right now. Don't stress over it. You know, we're going to work with you. We're going to help you guys out any way that we can.
I think one thing too, Lori, just having that dialogue with Mr. Jim that Joy and I had recently with, because in that, you know, because I believe I'm no expert in emergency preparedness, but I did live and learn from the different efforts with the response. But, you know, I think folks that are joining the Zoom can do some more reading into ESF 8, how it's their different plans in their state. But one of the things that we hope to work on, as Joy mentioned, a success with getting the vaccinations to shelters a little bit earlier. But, you know, we had some dialogue and we hope to look at it further. I know I mentioned earlier some prospective RFP verbiage with, you know, that folks on here may be able to add that as part of a specification with, if they don't already have it, but at least putting it on paper, an entity may be able to provide that to folks on the call. But also we had dialogue with, you know, in the verbiage of the ESF 8 plan, generally they're updated to my understanding, you know, and when we talk about, you know, planning your work your plan, but it's a process. It's not like it's a journey per se. It's not, you're there and you're done, you can check it off. But one of the things that we hope to do is in that ESF 8 structure and coordinating agencies, the way I looked at it, just a kind of a cursory glance, is that it's mostly state government agencies and entities. So for our world per se, maybe we can get a representative, at least from, you know, Sexual Assault Coalition, Domestic Violence Coalition, to be at the table when these plans are being updated to make sure that our victims and the employees, you know, and the victims there at the shelters and the victims that receive our services, you know, that those folks are at the table to have that dialogue, you know, to possibly include those organizations with that type of response at an organizational level and logistical level. So we kind of learned that, you know, because after having dialogue with Mr. Jim, but that may be something folks on the call can get involved in at their local and or state level, is having that dialogue because what we are learning, you know, childcare centers are often, you know, part of those plans, but, you know, how do we get shelters involved with those as well? So I think that's something that we've learned, you know, from COVID and the experiences from COVID.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. And I'm wondering if others want to join in the dialogue and share a little bit about their own experiences and lessons learned associated with, you know, the kinds of, you know, cross-agency planning or communication with subgrantees or just things that you've learned along the way that you want to share with your peers. While you ponder that, I can share that as a direct service, we're a technical assistance provider also is, but we're also also a direct service provider. And we address shootings and homicides in Chicago. Well, as we know, rates of violence skyrocketed during lockdown. And so we saw shootings go up, we saw homicides go up, we saw calls to the domestic violence hotline go up. I'm sure that you all saw the same things across your states and territories. But our staff, our frontline staff, were not deemed essential workers by the state statute. So they were supposed to be at home, just like, you know, everyone else. And so we did some advocacy and got the mayor's office to write letters that they could carry with them in their vehicles or pockets to be able to continue to do the kind of life-saving street outreach and violence prevention work. And so it was very, very helpful. And then in deeming them essential workers and having them on the front lines, they began to sort of take on a different role and do some different functions. Not only violence prevention, but they also did food distribution, PPE distribution. And so when that occurred, we communicated with our funders and let them know that the scope of work for those positions changed. And we got in writing permission to temporarily change their scopes of work, right, to these more sort of basic functions. And simultaneous to that, we knew that there were those of us who had a lot of privilege and we were able to work from home while others were on the front lines. Because they didn't technically have essential worker status, they weren't getting hazard pay. I went to our board of directors and advocated, and the board of directors approved what we wound up calling mission commitment bonuses for those staff. Wasn't a whole lot of money. It was like an extra $100 a week across the board, but they would get paid out quarterly. And so those mission commitment bonuses would, and we also got the funders to approve us to fold those into the budgets. So that's now in our employee handbook. That's now, we've sort of instituted some of those changes. Should anything like this ever happen again, we've got the record of budgetary approval. We've got record of board approval. We've got record of, sort of the way in which we would institute something like that. And staff really felt, even though it wasn't a lot of money, they felt really, I think, appreciated, rewarded. It felt consistent with our values. And they were indeed incurring additional, risk in those jobs. So that was like one modification in the way we sort of managed that with our funders to make sure that those approvals were documented, and that worked out well for us.
I know here in the state of Mississippi, initially when the pandemic occurred, we didn't have a lot of questions concerning hazard pay or anything like that. However, the longer it lasted and you had more staff that developed COVID, then you had more people having to work a lot of overtime. And like Lori said, just everything changed within those agencies, how they were providing services. And we had to sit and have dialogue in-house at the Office Against Violence Prevention to discuss how are we going to help these agencies through this. When you've got people calling up here saying, now, I know in staff, we put this in our budget, however, we're fixing to go way over because of COVID, and we have half of our staff is out with COVID. So what do we do now? How is this going to affect us? And like Lori said, interacting with our funders to make sure that we're following the regulations that we need to, but then also reaching out to our providers, our sub-grantees, and saying, okay, here's what we've got, here's what's going on. First of all, how can we help you? What do we need? What do you need from us, first of all? And then have dialogue with them about what is okay. It is okay if you start to make changes. It's okay if you didn't have this in a plan before today. Let's talk about what we need to change and how we need to move forward with this. I know last year when we were having the tornado so bad, Omar periodically reached out to me. Joy, are y'all okay? Just, did any of you guys, or did any of your sub-grantees sustain any damage? And fortunately, I was able to say no, but it was nice just to know that he was reaching out saying, okay, we're here if you need us. Whatever you need from me, let me know. And as administrators, we can do the same thing for our sub-grantees. Just let them know that we're here to support them in whatever they need from us. And, if we can make it happen, let's make it happen and help them make those adjustments and help them move forward, and then be prepared for the next time it happens. One of the things that we discussed in our meetings last week was helping agencies understand maybe after the crisis is over, or after pandemic, tornadoes, hurricane, whatever, is that, okay, we're out. So let's talk now about the results, where we are, where you are as an agency, and then what do we need to do to be prepared for the next time. And also helping these agencies understand that there is no one size fits all. It's going to be different for everybody. Like Brad said, we have agencies in the Delta. If you're familiar with the Mississippi Delta, that is a whole different world from our coast. And so we cannot approach those agencies the same, and helping them understand that it's okay to be different too, and addressing the specific needs of each agency.
I'm wondering if you all can share some examples from a peer-to-peer perspective associated with, some support you needed to provide or modifications that you had to provide related to either the pandemic or some sort of natural disaster that you've dealt with in your state to be responsive to the needs of grantees and kind of keep services going. And if you don't come off camera, that's okay. Or if you want to put it in the chat, that's okay. But I think this is an opportunity for us to learn from each other. And I appreciate so much, Joy and Brad, you helping use Mississippi as an example, because you guys sure have gone through a lot. I know other states have had challenges as well. And we've all certainly gone through this pandemic together.
I think everybody's tired.
I know.
It appears that way. So I know that the state of Kentucky, you guys, and there were other states. I can say Kentucky because I have a niece-in-law that is from there, and I know that you guys were devastated with some tornadoes lately too. So,
Lindsay, I just saw you come on screen. Were you going to chime in?
Yeah, I guess I have a little bit of a unique perspective, just because I've been doing this is grant administration work for only about a year now. And prior to that, just before the beginning of the pandemic, I was still in Ohio and I was a direct service provider. I was excuse me, my cats are causing problems. I was a manager of a domestic violence shelter, of a 61-bed shelter in Ohio and Dayton. And we had kind of a lot of everything almost just before the pandemic, as Dayton had 18 tornadoes that demolished half of our affordable housing. We had a shooting in a mass shooting in our downtown. And we had a KKK rally also in our downtown, and that was 2 blocks over from our shelter. So we had a significant amount of just natural emergencies and things that were completely unexpected. And then just before the pandemic happened. And I think, speaking at the very least as a direct service provider, to the flexibility that we received from our Ohio affiliates was actually incredibly helpful. One, because we did have a lot of flexibility and conversation with the people who were providing our funding to be able to adjust to that. What are our increased housing needs going to be because of the tornado? What are our increased safety concerns going to continue to be, as we have folks who don't have as many options and have to come into shelter? And just a bunch of different pieces that really impacted our survivors and our staff. So we had staff whose houses, we had staff who direct service providers who were on the front line through all of COVID, and continue to be so committed. They wanted to be in the shelter, but also had family members that were high risk that they were taking care of. So really adjusting some additional, like what we deemed also was hazard pay, but was very similar to what you were talking about, Lori, as far as just instituting a more long-term way of how to handle these things, because it was going to continue to happen in some form or fashion. And unfortunately, we just experienced it all at once, one after the other. And we really could rely on our crime victim services folks and our funders to have that direct conversation with and say, hey, we have this funding that has been previously, allocated for this piece of it. We've really got to shift it. We have to shift it quickly to be able to meet the needs of our survivors, and then also to meet the needs of our staff, who are incredibly traumatized and continue to be so, but who want to show up and want to do the work.
Thank you for sharing, Lindsay. I appreciate it. And Mary Ellen, I see your hand raised as well.
I think Lena came on first.
I did come on. I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand.
I passed kindergarten. I know how to stand in line.
So I appreciate it. We do a team up more Zoom. My thing to raise my hand. Kentucky was mentioned, so I just wanted to say, actually, while we're located in central Kentucky, the tornado went through western Kentucky. And actually, I'm originally from there and arrived there about 45 minutes before the tornado hit. And actually, we took my family's property, took a direct hit. I was actually on my way out of town. And so quite frankly, I didn't even think about my programs. And, I had to spend the night there, no electricity, no nothing, and people had to saw their way in the next morning. But my understanding is my colleagues, because most of our DB and SA programs both get in that area, get both BAWA and VOCA funding. My VOCA colleagues, they all checked in with them. And I think none of the shelters took a direct hit. So they came out pretty good. I think they had some staffing issues, but it is my understanding while I wasn't there, was dealing with my own stuff. Our folks did check in and, were right there to help them and whatever they could. They had already, before I came to the office, they had already dealt with the pandemic and had to deal with that. They had previously dealt with a school shooting and kind of had to respond to that. So they're a pretty good bunch, and they stepped right in there and thought about the folks down there and reached out to help them.
Thank you, Lana. Mary Ellen?
Yes. Hold on. Let me make sure I got my volume up. Excellent. So, I really appreciate this particular breakout session, and, really thinking about like planning of what to be, how we can pivot. And I think, we have natural disasters. 13 of our counties, we have 33 counties, are under fire right now, like literal fires. We've had communities just lose homes and just lots of stuff going on. But what I really reflect on, and I think that it's hitting all professions, right? But I think planning for the unexpected right now really also needs to take a conversation around how to think about the change in landscape of our service providers. Because, I think about, it's been 2 years, almost 2 years and 1 month in our state since we shut down, and we're still quasi shut down. And I remember like March 18th of 2020, like trying to help providers find milk, right? And find toilet paper. And never in my entire career did I think that I would be looking at data around fecal samples in sewers to do COVID, right? Like, so we have all these things that we've learned, and we have folks who are leaving the profession, right? We have folks who are leaving the industry, all industries, right? Like all industries are being impacted by this, but we have folks who are leaving the profession and taking just huge amounts of institutional knowledge with them in a way that historically, they take the institutional knowledge, but that they still kind of hang out and volunteer and relay that. And some of us are just done, right? And you can make more at Walmart, you can make more at Target and not get yelled at. You can make more at McDonald's and not have to deal with compartmentalizing and dealing with all that. And so I think, as we think about how we move forward with the complexities of the work that we do, with our VAWA funds, how we, I was listening to the White House talk about the 22 reauthorization, and they're saying they're hearing from the fields that we need more discretionary awards. And I'm like, well, what field are they talking to? We need more STOP money. It's not enough, right? Like, who are they talking to? And I think that, just the sheer complexities, of the VOCA funding cuts and all of that we're going through, we are, as state administering agencies, in a prime opportunity to help our programs develop succession plans, develop, even though we've had them pivot and write, like I have never helped agencies write so many policies and procedures to give pay differentials in my entire life, right? Like here's, and all of those things that we've done in this reactive way, and my favorite imagery of these last 2 years is not only are we building the bus as we're driving it, we're paving the road in front of the bus that we're building, right? Like that's the overwhelming impact of the world in which we're living. And I think it's heavy. And I really think that if we don't talk about how to keep folks in this movement, we're going to see social services disappear in ways that we've unfortunately seen our mental health professions disappear. And we're in a, catastrophic pandemic of needing mental health professionals. And I'm worried that we're headed that way with our social service and advocacy organizations as well. And I know that sounds very dire, but I think it's I think it's across the board. Anyway, those are my 2 cents in reflecting on this particular conversation. I think that was more like $1.50.
You know what, though? I'd love to hear more, because I think that you have likely been very thoughtful about this. In our last session, we talked about wellness, taking care of ourselves, putting policies in place that help, organizations take care of their staff, to do just what you're talking about, right? To help sustain us in this work. One of the things we've done it also is take the concept of sick leave and make it wellness leave. So that if you're sick, you can certainly take your sick leave, but we also want you to take that leave to maintain your health and wellness. So if you need to go to yoga, or you need to go to see a therapist, or whatever those things are, right? That help keep you well and whole, do that. And I'm wondering if you guys have been having those kinds of conversations in your state, Mary Ellen.
We absolutely have, and very early on, very, very early on. I would say probably April of 2020, it was evident. We started meeting weekly with all of our service providers. We had a weekly meeting for 18 months, one for DV, one for sexual assault, one for child abuse, one for, all victimizations. I had 6 meetings a week with just providers across the state, in addition to with our coalition. So I think I was having like 8 meetings a week. I don't know how I can explain why I'm behind. Omar, sorry. And very, very early on, we recognized folks are doing this work in their homes now, right? You were able to drive between your house to your place of employment, and to have that separation. We knew it was happening in folks' homes, having conversations around not having the computers in your bedrooms, telling agencies, we will not support you having staff use their own personal equipment. They need their own cell phones. They need policies, right? They need to be able to separate, and being able to, because we administer all the money, put our money where our mouth is. We paid for the phones. We paid for the computers. We did our trainings, our big statewide trainings around self-care and, what that looks like. So it's been a lot of conversations, and on all levels, like the impact on our directors who are holding space, right? So it kind of felt like, okay, we're state administering agencies, and we're holding the space for all of the providers. And then you have your directors are holding it for their staff, right? Being a leader is hard right now. It's hard. And so, we're having those conversations. Our Advocacy in Action Conference is a 10-month event this year, where it's pieced out in short sections, like 2 hours, 3, twice a month, so that folks can really kind of gain the information. Because, I mean, how many of you today whose photos aren't up right now have been interrupted in today's meeting because it is virtual? And right? And you can naturally do 3 or 4 things at once, right? So we're doing more. Anyway, I could talk for this forever. You know me, Lori.
So Mary Ellen, I'm like you, Mary Ellen. I think we're soul sisters from different states, because when I'm passionate, I don't shut up. That's
Right.
just me. And in our earlier session and the conversations that Brad and I have had with Lori, we've talked a lot about wellness and, working with our sub-grantees. One of the things that I discussed earlier is the wellness of the staff, and then looking at how do we help trauma providers when they're in trauma, because it's hard, and we know it's happening. We know it's happening every day, and working trauma is trauma in itself. We all know that. That's just normal. So then when you add all of these extenuating circumstances on top of it, how do we help? And dialogue, that's one thing we've talked about. Dialogue is one of the most important things, making sure, they know that we're here and things like that. But then at the same time, addressing that it's okay to not be okay during these times and letting them know that we're okay with that. As I addressed earlier, I came from a direct service agency for years. So I feel their pain a lot of times. And Brad and he mentioned this in the earlier discussion. I can tell you as a sub-grantee, if I had reporting due, like you just said to Omar, Mary Ellen, if I had reports due, but you called me and told me that I had a victim at the hospital and I sat all night at the hospital and then had to be in court with another victim the next day, and the hearing was supposed to last a day and it lasted 3 days, those reports didn't matter to me, because what mattered to me was that specific victim right then and right there.
Right.
So, and letting these agencies know that that's okay with us. Yeah, we have timelines and we need stuff by a certain time, but it is perfectly okay if there are circumstances that prevent you from doing that, and letting them know it's okay. Two things that to me are very important is, again, the wellness time, allowing them to rewrite policies and procedures and include that. When I worked at the Victims Compensation Office, we read law enforcement reports. I've been doing this work had been doing this work for years. I thought I could usually handle pretty much anything, but there was always going to be this one report that I read that would just take me out for the rest of the day. I would have to mentally check out. And I mean, it happens. Fortunately for me, we had an amazing director, and she could be walking down the hall back from the bathroom or something. And if she looked in your office and she saw it, she would smile and say, "Hey, I'm tired of seeing your face today. You need to go home." And that was, we wouldn't have to take leave. It was just like administratively, go home, do what you need to do for you, take care of you, whatever it is. And I appreciated that. And that was her teaching us self-care and letting them know that that is okay. In the agency I worked for, we talk about the different circumstances and how it affects. I never imagined that I would have to deal with bed bugs. And, we don't think about those things. It's just not something we think about every day. However, I worked in a domestic violence shelter. Someone brought bed bugs in. It took us 6 months to get rid of the bed bugs. And those were probably 6 of the worst months of my life. I mean, I'm a social worker. Social work school didn't prepare me for that. Advocacy training did not prepare me for that. I was the director. So in the eyes of the victims, I was the one that was supposed to be fixing this problem, and it wasn't getting fixed. And when I would walk in and mothers would hand babies to me saying, "Look at the bites all over my baby. You have to do something about this." That was hard for me. And honestly, Mary Ellen, you were talking about people leaving. That was my point where I decided I don't know how much longer I can do this. I can't, that responsibility was hard. But not only did it affect me at work, I had to take it home. Every day of my life during those 6 months of work, I had to go home and I had to change clothes, had to totally take a shower, I had to totally rearrange my routine because of that situation at work. And so that was trauma to a point for me, because it totally changed my life during that time. I couldn't go out to eat with friends after work. You can't do that when you have a fear that you're going to take bed bugs with you. So everything about my life completely changed during that time, and it was very difficult. So those are things that we can't always prepare them for, but I think the conversation of saying, we don't know what may happen, but we're here for you when something does happen. Let's prepare for what we can prepare for, because hopefully something that we have prepared for will fit somewhat into what you may go through that might be a little bit different, and helping them through that.
I was going to share too, Lori. I think because we're in the people business, and I know folks on here probably come from different state agencies, if they're a state agency or different organizations, but we're in the people business and valuing folks. And, Joy's my direct boss, and she and I have, really good dialogue. So she's learned me, I've learned her. I knew her before I took the position, but I think it's a process, but it's a focus that organizations, can and should have, because we're all of us have different needs and ways we approach things, but having dialogue with your people, making it a focus, and then make it part of your culture and your value system with, like we said, is, just communication and sharing with people that what resources are available. Like if you have employee assistance programs or EAP, my previous position, 2 positions ago, I was a state worksite wellness director with state agency. So, one of the things we do here I'm still a wellness champion per se. And so I get emails and I disseminate those to our staff. That's a contractual provider with state and school employee health insurance. So I think there are ways, whether it's a monthly well-being calendar, but I think it's a focus where, learning what kind of self-care that your folks need and helping provide those resources, whatever they may be, but having that dialogue of, just what well-being, because it's a journey. I mean, this is not a kind of something where you get to. I mean, some weeks I'm better than others. I typically go on old man walks, is what I call them. And that's kind of my way to get away from the computer. And, but I think it's a process, and we've hit on earlier too with, the mental health and well-being, because all of us deal with stress in different ways, but helping your people, adjust to those stressors. I think everybody's going through something, right? But having that dialogue with folks and valuing your people and having that communication and that trust, where people will talk to you. Because I have no doubt I go to Joy and say, hey, Joy, I need to, there's some things that, personally I'm dealing with or whatever. And she would definitely understand. So I think it's, because when we're impacted, it impacts our work. But I think Joy has helped me understand, because I'm very, sometimes I don't look at, I'm very focused and driven, but Joy has helped me look at it and understand when she worked with as a provider herself, working with victims. And we've expressed earlier on this Zoom is that, life happens and there's certain things and trying to be empathetic, but having that dialogue and you would hope that your provider or your entities would tell you that, hey, I've had blah, 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 there was a death in the family, I may be a little late on getting this to you, is that okay? I think the biggest thing is just communication with that, but we're human, but having that trust with your folks.
Thanks, Brad. I think that you're right. It's the communication, it's the human connection, it's, that sort of trust when things are hard, to know that we're all doing the very best we can, at the moment to get by and to really support one another. I've heard you all talk about, and I've heard others talk about just the number of meetings, the increased number of meetings, during the pandemic, particularly when we were on lockdown. But, our management team was meeting 3 times a week, just to like really figure out our operations. We continue those strategy meetings once a week now. we kind of titrated them down from 3 to 2 to 1. But I'm wondering if, others, as we've got about 5 minutes left, and kind of focusing on coping strategies and wellness and things that you've either done to take care of yourself personally or things that you've helped others institute. If you could share some examples from your own jurisdiction.
Did everybody go home? Are their cameras just on and nobody's home, right?
I think people are tired.
Everybody's exhausted, right? I know. I think some of the best. Oh, Emily, go ahead.
Emily says, I'm still here, I promise. And
wanna go
she's in
ahead,
her
Emily?
office, so.
Talk a lot.
No, I was just reminiscing when someone said that they've been interrupted a bunch of times. Like my door is partially cracked right now, but it's been trying to stay focused. But I can definitely, Mary Ellen, if you want to go first, I can definitely jump in and contribute as well.
I think some of the coping mechanisms are continuing to just be flexible and give each other grace. I'm really, 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 really lucky. Our state, I'm always going to be the fund. Well, I don't know. Who knows where my career is going to lead me? But currently I'm the funder, right? And I've been the funder for a while, but I don't feel like that negative, relationship where folks are afraid to come and say, I need help. I made a mistake. I need, like, well, how would you do this? Like, it's a text at 2:00 in the afternoon or at 6:00 in the evening. Hey, I got a survivor. Can you approve this emergent? Like, it's a constant dialogue. And I think that, I've had personal tragedy in the last year, and I have been just overwhelmed with grace from, all of our agencies, our coalitions and subrecipients to, remind me and push me, because it's outside of my nature, but push all of us when it's outside of our nature to take care of ourselves. And that, I think about, we have like language access plans or something that we do because it's the right thing to do. And it's just an automatic thing. And I feel like during COVID, one of the things that came really apparent out of this was our state, our communities, our providers recognized and uplifted the need to hold our families first, hold ourselves first, and then the work second, but not in a way that the work is less important, but that in order to be successful at it, we have to be able to know that our homes and our lives are cared for. And so I think that the biggest thing that came out of all of these last 2 years for us in New Mexico is a true sense of grace for all of each other.
What a beautiful way to wrap up this session. Yeah, what a beautiful sentiment. Thank you, Mary Ellen, for sharing that. And I've been holding you in my heart. Yeah. So thank you all we're at time. Thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you listening in and participating as you can. We know it's a very long day. We know you've got a lot on your plate, a lot of interruptions, implementation plans to finish. So thank you. And what I'll do now is turn it over to Courtney to close us out.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to our presenters as well. And we will see you all back here tomorrow, again, utilizing the attendee hub that you have been. The first session starts at 11 Eastern, 10 Central, 9 Mountain Standard, and then 8 a.m. Pacific. Also, if you have any questions for us at the STAR Project, you can email the STAR Project TA at alsochicago.org. And then if you have any questions for the presenters, you can actually find their information in the speaker hub or in the speaker section of the attendee hub. But thank you all for joining us today. This is the last session of the day, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Have a good night.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you all. Good night.
Take care. Get some rest.